coast to coast. What matters, when it matters. This is today's talk. Your world, your news, right now.
All right, you're tuned in for a quick look at what's really making headlines around the world today.
Yeah, we've got quite a mix landing on our desks.
From the passing of a major global figure to potential shifts in some pretty long-standing conflicts, and even, how events are shaking up industries.
Exactly. Think of it as your quick briefing, hitting the key points, maybe connecting a few dots you might have missed otherwise.
And we'll try to give you the different angles because these things are rarely simple.
Yeah, definitely complex. Okay, where do we start?
Let's dive straight in with news that's really resonating everywhere. The passing of Pope Francis. He was 88.
Yeah. That feels like the end of an era, doesn't it?
It really does. A figure who, meant a lot to many people, even beyond the Catholic Church.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the reports say he'll lie in state for 3 days.
Right, before the funeral this Saturday.
And it sounds like quite the event.
Yeah, word is numerous world leaders are expected. People like former President Trump, President Zelensky from Ukraine.
Wow. That really underscores his position, doesn't it? A sort of unique blend of spiritual and, moral influence that gets political leaders' attention.
Definitely. And you can imagine the logistics, having figures like that there.
Oh, absolutely. And then, of course, all eyes turn to the conclave.
Right. The cardinal's meeting to elect his successor. That's starting when?
At least a week after the funeral is the word.
The New York Times is already calling him a voice for the voiceless. Also a consistent moral guidepost. That feels about right, given the times.
I think that captures a lot of the sentiment, yeah. He often championed, marginalized groups, wasn't afraid to get into some tough social debates.
He really wasn't.
And it's interesting, that detail about why he apparently never went back to Argentina as Pope.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
Concerns that his visit might be politically exploited. It just highlights the tightrope these global figures have to walk.
Hadn't heard that. It does make sense, though. And his whole papacy seemed focused on shifting the church towards, more inclusion, focusing on the margins.
That was definitely a key theme. Trying to emphasize pastoral care, a more sort of merciful approach. It felt like a conscious shift.
Yeah.
And on a completely different cultural note, but another passing bagger, the BBC mentioned the death of Zurab Tsereteli.
Yeah, Zurab Tsereteli. Hang on, the name rings a bell. Remind me.
Georgian-Russian artist. He was 91. Known for these absolutely massive sculptures.
Yeah.
Monumental stuff.
Oh, right. Huge things, weren't they? Sometimes controversial.
Very. Some were colossal. I mean, seriously big.
Yeah.
Definitely left a large footprint, you could say, albeit a very different kind.
Okay, shifting gears now to some much grimmer news. These reports from Kashmir.
Yeah, this is deeply disturbing. A terror attack.
Yeah.
Militants killing at least 24 tourists.
Just horrific. And the reports are stressing this is the worst attack on civilians there in years.
It really underscores the fragility in the region, the ongoing threat.
Prime Minister Modi condemned it, called it a terror attack, vowed justice. But that quote from the chief minister,
It's what?
in the BBC piece, he said it was much larger than anything we've seen directed at civilians in recent years.
Oof. That points to a really worrying escalation, doesn't it?
It really does. Makes you wonder about a shift in tactics or
Okay.
something. A terrible reminder of the human cost.
Absolutely.
Now, turning to Russia and Ukraine, we've been following this so closely. There are some, surprising signals maybe about direct talks.
It's interesting. Worth watching, certainly, but maybe with some caution.
What are you seeing?
Reports that both sides, Russia and Ukraine, have sort of publicly hinted they might be open to direct discussions.
Any reason why now?
Some speculation it might be linked to pressure from the Trump administration, maybe. The BBC even quoted Putin suggesting Russia's open to it.
And this is a big but, right? This is happening while the fighting is still intense.
Exactly. Strikes are ongoing in Ukraine, and there were those reports of big explosions at a Russian ammo depot east of Moscow.
Right. The BBC said Russian military sources blamed a fire. So, talk of talks, but the reality on the ground is still very violent.
Precisely. It's that classic complex situation. Diplomatic feelers out, maybe, but military action continues full force. Whether this talk leads anywhere, that remains to be seen.
A lot of mistrust there, obviously. Huge challenges.
Immense.
Okay, sticking with diplomacy, or maybe the lack of it, U.S.-Vietnam relations.
Ah, yes. The U.S. telling its diplomats in Vietnam to steer clear of war anniversary events.
That feels like a step backwards, doesn't it, after years of reconciliation efforts?
That's how the New York Times is framing it, yeah.
Yeah.
A reversal, potentially undermining that work, suggests maybe a shift in how the current administration views that history.
Interesting. Okay, and then Syria, this caught my eye. Arresting leaders of Palestinian militant groups.
Yeah, that's quite a shift. Syria, under Assad, has historically been a base, a haven for these factions.
So why now? Any ideas?
Well, the New York Times points out how unusual it is. It could signal Syria changing its alliances, maybe.
Well,
Or perhaps pressure from somewhere else. Regionally, internationally, hard to say for sure.
definitely raises questions about the dynamics over there.
For sure.
All right, let's pivot to something different. Europe's defense industry. Sounds like it's doing pretty well.
It seems so. With all the talk about, Europe maybe needing to rely less on the U.S. for security, especially given Trump's stance.
Countries are rethinking their own defense spending. Makes sense.
Exactly.
Mm.
And the New York Times reports that means more business for European arms makers, geopolitics driving economics.
Yep. And closer to home for some listeners, maybe in the UK, rural crime in England.
Ah, the organized crime targeting farm equipment.
Yeah, sophisticated stuff, apparently. High-value machinery, not just petty theft.
That's what the Times highlighted. Adds a whole other layer of pressure and anxiety for those rural communities.
The must do. Okay, zooming out again, the global economy, the IMF.
Not great news there. They've slashed the global growth forecasts,
Why?
pointing mainly to the impact of tariffs, trade tensions biting, basically.
And who's feeling it most?
Well, the BBC specifically mentioned the U.S. actually saw the biggest downgrade among the advanced economies in this forecast. So, something to watch.
Definitely. Okay, a couple more quick hits. Canada. Elections.
Record early voter turnout, apparently.
Yeah.
A big jump, like 25%, compared to their last election in 2021.
Wow. So high engagement there.
Seems like it. A positive sign for participation, anyway.
And then Ghana. Something pretty major happening there.
Yeah, quite unprecedented, according to the BBC. The president has suspended the country's chief justice
Suspended? Why?
amid allegations and an ongoing investigation. It's a big deal for their judicial system.
Sounds like it. And U.S.-India relations.
Vice President J.D. Vance is visiting India, calling for stronger ties, pushing trade talks forward.
So continued focus on that partnership.
Seems to be a priority, yeah, based on the BBC reporting.
Okay, and finally, this controversy about death toll figures in Gaza.
Right. The health ministry there is denying they manipulated figures. This came after several thousand names were reportedly removed from an official list of those killed in the conflict.
Okay, so they're pushing back on those accusations.
Yeah, the BBC covered the denial. It's obviously a very sensitive and highly scrutinized issue.
Absolutely. So, wow, quite the whirlwind tour today.
It really was.
We've gone from the passing of Pope Francis and, the global impact, the terrible attack in Kashmir, these sort of tentative signs around Russia-Ukraine talks, but still the fighting.
Shifts in U.S. foreign policy approach, the defense industry boom in Europe, economic forecasts.
Yeah, and then political events in Canada, Ghana, U.S.-India talks, the Gaza figures dispute. It really shows you how interconnected everything is, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And when you look at all these different pieces, you start to see maybe some common threads emerging.
Like what?
Well, maybe the shifting balance of global power, the ongoing impact of these regional conflicts that just don't seem to end, and how political choices constantly ripple through the economy.
It definitely makes you think about where things might be heading long term, doesn't it?
Oh.
What does it all add up to?
Exactly. Something to keep mulling over, perhaps. What's the bigger picture these snapshots are painting?
Good question. Definitely gives you a lot to chew on. Thanks for taking this deep dive with me today.
My pleasure.
All right, until our next briefing.